Okay, hello everybody. So welcome back to Digestive System Part 2. So we're going to pick up exactly where we left off from the first video in this series, and we are going to get through the rest of the digestive system. Okay, so we ended off with swallowing, right? The act of swallowing, and we saw how food gets mashed up into a bolus, and then that bolus gets pushed to the back of your throat by your tongue into the where the epiglottis is going to close the trachea, and then the food can go down your esophagus without getting into your airway. Okay, so from the esophagus, that food is then going to enter the stomach. Okay, the stomach is a muscular sac in the upper left abdominal cavity, and it's immediately inferior to the diaphragm, so it's right directly underneath the diaphragm. It's really tucked underneath there. Okay, the primary functions. It primarily functions as a food storage organ. Okay, the volume of your stomach is about 50 milliliters when it's empty. After a typical meal, it's holding around 1 to 1.5 liters of volume, which is a lot more than the 50 ml here. It can hold up to 4 liters when it's extremely, extremely full, and it can extend as far down as the pelvis, which is a pretty long way from where the stomach is. Okay, my advice is don't eat that much to distend your stomach to 4 liters. Okay, but what the stomach also does, besides just holding food, it actually mechanically breaks up your food. It liquefies your food, and it begins chemical digestions of proteins and fats. So if you remember the mouth, okay, the mouth is going to do digestion. Okay, it's going to mechanically digest, and it's going to chemically digest, but it's going to be mostly sugars, right? It's going to be mostly sugars and carbs. That's what's going to happen in the mouth. That's why if you have like a Jolly Rancher or a Starburst in your mouth, you don't have to chew it. It'll eventually break down because of the enzymes that your mouth produces, the saliva that your mouth produces, breaking down the sugars in that particular piece of candy or whatever. Your stomach. Okay, your stomach's going to be primarily proteins and fat digestions. Okay, this term chyme. Okay, chyme is a soupy or pasty mixture of semi-digested food in the stomach. So you had a bolus go from your mouth to your stomach, and then that bolus is going to be mechanically broken up even more and chemically broken up even more in the stomach. And once your stomach kind of churns the bolus up, that bolus then turns into what we call chyme or chyme. Okay. Most digestion occurs after the chyme passes into the small intestines. Okay, so once this chyme is produced and the stomach is done with it, that chyme is then sent into the small intestines from the stomach. So let's take a look at the gross anatomy of the stomach. So the stomach is J-shaped. It's relatively vertical in tall people, horizontal in short people. Okay, depending on your body shape will depend on how it kind of sits inside of your abdomen. You have 4 major regions. Whoops, sorry. Okay, you have 4 major regions of the stomach. Okay, one is the cardial part, okay, or the cardia. It's named that because it's close to the heart. It's right that could be misleading, right? That could kind of, if you see this word, you might think of the heart. But if you take a look at where the heart sits, and I'll show you a picture of that soon. The cardia or the cardiac region of the heart is kind of close to the center of the chest, okay, but it's below the diaphragm. When gastric juices get out of the cardia and go into the esophagus, we call that heartburn because of how close it is to our heart. That's why we call it heartburn. Your heart isn't burning, it's your digestive system, but due to the placement of this part of the heart, we call it heartburn. Okay, but the cardia is a small area, about 3 centimeters of the orifice. That we have the fundus. Number 2 is the fundus. This is a dome-shaped portion superior to the esophageal attachment. Okay, and you're going to see that when we look at the picture. Okay, the body of the stomach makes up the greatest area of the stomach. The last part of the stomach is called the pyloric part. It's a narrower pouch at the inferior end of the stomach. The pylorus and the pyloric sphincter, these are things that are going to be at the very end of the stomach where the stomach exits into the small intestine. The pylorus is the passage to the intestines, and that's what the duodenum is. The duodenum is the first portion of our small intestines. And the pyloric sphincter is a circular muscle, right? Anytime you see sphincter, it's a circular muscle, right? And the pyloric sphincter is going to regulate the passage of chyme into the duodenum. Okay, so when food wants to go from the stomach into the intestines, it has to pass through the pyloric sphincter. Okay, and it's going to regulate. It's going to open and close, so it allows foodstuffs to pass through. Okay, so here's the stomach. You can see. Let me get my pen. Okay, you can see the J shape here. Okay, this is the cardiac sphincter. Okay, it's going to be a sphincter that allows for food to pass through the esophagus and into, let me get a different color, pass through the esophagus and into the actual stomach. Here is that dome-shaped fundus, and we say that it's above the esophageal opening, right? And it is. If you take a look here, it's above the esophageal opening. Okay, and that's the fundus. Okay, so the cardiac or the cardia is here. The fundus is this shape here. This area is the body. Okay, that's going to be our body of our stomach. Okay, we'll have our pylorus here. That's the passageway to the small intestines. This circular muscle is our pyloric sphincter. And here is the duodenum, which is the first portion of our small intestines. Okay, we do need to also know the gastric rugae. Okay, the gastric rugae, if you can see in here, there are these like folds, okay, all inside. And those folds are really important because the more folds you have, the more surface area it gives you, so you can do more and more digestion. Okay. So be able to label and identify those parts when the time comes. Okay, here is a actual human stomach taken from a cadaver. Okay, it's a little shriveled up, or it looks shriveled up because of that rugae, right? Those rugae are those folds inside the stomach, those little pouches inside the stomach that are going to increase surface area. Okay, once again, our cardiac sphincter. Okay, that's where our esophagus would be. Here's our fundus. Okay, this area here is our fundus. This is the body. Okay, our pylorus, pyloric sphincter, duodenum. Okay, very good. Okay, so what does the stomach release as far as gastric juices? Okay, about 2 to 3 liters per day. Okay, that's a lot. One large bottle of soda is a 2-liter bottle. So that's how much gastric juice your stomach makes in a typical day. Okay, mainly what that juice is made of is water, hydrochloric acid, and something called pepsin. Okay, pepsin is going to digest proteins. Okay, so we're going to need to know for our exam that pepsin, or the different enzymes and what they break down, right? So salivary amylase is going to break down carbohydrates. Okay, pepsin will break down proteins, and it breaks down proteins into smaller proteins. Okay, this digestion of protein isn't completed in the stomach. It actually gets completed in the small intestine. There's also gastric lipase. Okay, lipase refers to an enzyme that breaks down fats or lipids, right? That's where we get the term lipase. Lipase, okay? So we have amylase breaking down sugars, pepsin breaking down proteins, lipase breaking down fats, okay? So we need to know those things. Okay, it digests the stomach 10% to 15% of dietary fats. Okay, the rest of those fats have to be digested somewhere else. Okay, and that somewhere else is going to be the small intestines. Okay. The stomach also produces something called intrinsic factor, which is a glycoprotein. Glycoproteins are proteins that are like part sugar, part protein. They're secreted by parietal cells of the stomach. And the reason we need intrinsic factor is because it's essential for the absorption of vitamin B12. Okay, without intrinsic factor, you cannot absorb B12 very well. Okay, What it does is it binds B12, and then the interstitial cells or the intestinal cells absorb that entire complex by something called receptor-mediated endocytosis, which is where cells are going to kind of help take these things in. Okay, so if you don't have intrinsic factor, it cannot bond to the B12, and then your intestinal cells can't take it in. Okay, so if you do have problems like that, there are supplements that you can take to kind of try to replicate this process, but it's not going to be as good as the real thing. Why do we need B12? Why is it so important? Okay, B12 is important because it's needed to synthesize hemoglobin. And if we remember our previous chapters on blood and circulation, hemoglobin is going to be a very important chemical that's in our bloodstream that helps us to carry oxygen. Okay, if you don't have hemoglobin, then oxygen can't be carried around the cells or carried around to the cells. Okay, and when you don't have enough oxygen in your bloodstream, that is a disease called anemia. Okay, when you are anemic, you are not getting oxygen for certain reasons. There's different types of anemia depending on what the problem is, but anemia is a lack of oxygen getting to cells. Secretion of the intrinsic factor is the only indispensable function of the stomach, and digestion can continue if you don't have a stomach, but if you don't have a stomach, you'll need to take B12 supplements in order to get the amount of B12 that you need for that hemoglobin production. You might be saying, well, why would you ever get a stomach removed? Well, there's this one TV show that I like to reference all the time. It was called Ripley's Believe It or Not. And it was a TV show that was on when I was a kid. And they show you weird and crazy things. And there was this one gentleman on the show who tried to commit suicide. And what he did was he drank oven cleaner, industrial oven cleaner, and it burnt his entire esophagus. It burnt his entire stomach and part of his small intestines. It didn't kill him, but it took away probably a good 4 or 5 feet, the first 4 or 5 feet of his digestive system. So what they did was they just took whatever end of his intestines where that damage stopped and just connected his intestines directly to his throat. So he didn't have an esophagus. He didn't have a stomach after that. So he was able to still digest, but not nearly as good. And he was most definitely on B12 supplements because of that incident. Okay, vomiting. Okay, let's talk about that. We've all vomited before, I'm sure. It's not a very pleasant function that we do, but it is a forceful ejection of stomach and intestinal content, which is chyme, from the mouth. Okay, vomiting is induced in a couple of ways. Okay, one, by overstretching of the stomach or the duodenum. Okay, so if you eat, that's overeating. If you eat too much, the stomach will have to get rid of some of that content and you can vomit. There are things that could cause you to vomit, like chemical irritants. Okay, things that you drink that you shouldn't drink could cause you to throw up. Some of that is alcohol. Some of that could be bacterial toxins, right? Some of that could be like food poisoning, right? So if you had too much alcohol, your body's trying to save you from alcohol poisoning, so I'll make you vomit, okay, to get alcohol out of your system. And if you ate something that was, tainted with bacteria from a restaurant, okay, those bacterial toxins can make you sick and can make you vomit as well. Visceral trauma, okay, so if you actually have some type of physical trauma to the surface of the stomach, that could make you vomit. Or intense pain or psychological pain and sensory stimuli could make you vomit as well. Okay. Vomiting is usually preceded by nausea and retching. So before you vomit, you typically feel that you are going to vomit, right? There's always that feeling of, oh, I'm going to be sick. Maybe you get lightheaded, maybe you get a little dizzy. Okay. And then you start to retch. Okay. Retching is kind of like, almost like the dry heaves before you start vomiting. Okay. But the technical term of it is thoracic expansion and abdominal contraction creates pressure difference that dilates your esophagus. So your esophagus is going to get bigger, going to get wider before you vomit. Okay. And that's going to kind of give you this retching feeling. Okay. The lower esophageal sphincter, so that sphincter that's connected to the stomach, is going to relax while the stomach and duodenum contract. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So the esophagus will get wider because it knows that the stomach and duodenum are going to try to force food out of your mouth. Okay, if the esophagus doesn't relax, this causes a lot of pain. Okay, this could cause a lot of pain. And sometimes you might even feel that, right? Where your esophagus, kind of doesn't relax in time, and your stomach and your duodenum are contracting very rapidly, and your esophagus didn't catch up yet, and it could cause some pain in your abdomen, mostly like where your diaphragm would be, right underneath your rib cage. Okay, but once that happens, the chyme is going to enter the esophagus, and sometimes it can drop back into the stomach. That's a dry heave, right? So you have officially vomited a little bit. Okay, and that chyme has entered the esophagus, but it wasn't enough force to get it out of your mouth, so it drops back into your stomach, and that's kind of like a dry heave, where you get that sensation, but nothing comes out of your mouth. Okay, this is usually accompanied by tachycardia, which is it messes with your heart rhythm a little bit. Profuse salivation and sweating. Okay, all of these things I'm sure you have all felt when vomiting, right? Your heart rate is increased. Okay, you have lots of liquids coming out of your mouth. That's not necessarily vomit. It's just salivation or saliva, and you're sweating. Okay, you're clammy and you're sweating and you're sick, right? And those are all signs of or things that happen when you vomit. Okay, some people have chronic vomiting. My older brother had a problem with chronic vomiting, and it usually happened after he ate food. Anytime he had a meal, he would have coughing fits, and sometimes those coughing fits led to vomiting, and that's not good, because the acids in your stomach should not be anywhere else but in your stomach or in your intestines. They shouldn't be in your esophagus. They shouldn't be in your mouth, and it could eat away. And we're going to talk about ulcers later, but it could eat away at the tissues of your esophagus and your mouth. And your teeth, could ruin your teeth too. Okay, this results in dangerous fluid, electrolyte, and acid-base imbalances. Okay, that's what I was talking about with my brother with the dangerous fluid. Okay, but you can mess with your electrolytes and your acid-base balances when you vomit too much as well. Okay, there's an eating disorder called bulimia. Okay, bulimia is a hydrochloric, it's where hydrochloric acid in vomiting causes tooth enamel to erode. So that's one way that it can affect your mouth, right? The acids in your stomach, if you are bulimic, you are vomiting all the time, right? Someone who is bulimic does not want to eat because they fear, a poor body image, and they are constantly forcing themselves to throw up, right? And the hydrochloric acid that comes up from the stomach and gets into their mouth, okay, that acid hits your enamel, okay, and it erodes the enamel, okay, and if you do this constantly for months or weeks or years, okay, it could do a lot of damage to your teeth. Okay, aspiration, we talked about that. That's inhalation, but if you inhale or aspire acid, it can be destructive to the respiratory tract, right? Sometimes, as you're vomiting, you can inhale, and some of that content of your stomach could get near your respiratory tract, and you don't want it there at all, right? You definitely don't. You only want air in there. You don't want stomach acids in there, okay? Surgical anesthesia may cause nausea. It must be preceded by fasting. That's why when you ever get some type of procedure done where they have to put you under anesthesia, they always tell you to fast for 12 hours. So that your small intestines are completely empty and that your stomach is completely empty, because the anesthesia can cause you to vomit. Okay, it could cause some people to vomit, and they don't want you vomiting while they're operating on you. Okay. Okay, the stomach is protected in 3 ways from the harsh acidic enzymes, because like I just told you how bad the stomach juices are for all these different parts of your body. How is your stomach dealing with these acids and these juices? Okay, well, the first thing is that your stomach has a coat of mucus, really, really, really thick, basic mucus. That's what alkaline means. It means basic on the pH scale, like 12, 13, 14. And that mucus is going to counteract all of the acids and the enzymes in the stomach and kind of balance out the pH. When you get heartburn, when you have, indigestion, okay, the stomach acids are like a 1 or a 2. And what you do is you have Tums or you have Pepto, and those Tums have a pH of like 14. So when you combine the stomach acids and the Tums, okay, that gives you roughly a neutral type of environment in your stomach. Okay, there's also really tight junctions between the cells of the stomach, like really, really tight junctions between the cells. And that's going to prevent the gastric juices from getting in between and damaging your stomach tissues. Okay, so that's another thing. So you got the mucus coat, you have the cells really, really packed together so that these acids can't get in between them and dig down into the tissues and erode the tissues. And then you have epithelial cell replacement, okay, which is going to be exactly what you think it is. The cells live in your stomach for about 3 to 6 days, and then they are sloughed off into the chyme and digested with the food that you eat, okay, and they are rapidly replaced by mitosis, cell division. It's kind of like your skin, right? Your epidermis is constantly regenerating because you're losing skin cells all the time, and they are replaced rapidly. So anywhere where you have friction, you're going to see this, right? Wherever things are touching each other constantly. Okay, so your outermost skin is touching your clothes, touching other people, touching other surfaces, and you're going to lose skin cells very rapidly because of that abrasion. Same thing with your digestive system. Okay, your digestive system is rubbing up against food all the time, and that friction and that abrasion is going to cause these cells to be replaced very, very quickly. If any of these things kind of fail in protecting you, you can end up with what we call a peptic ulcer. Okay, so if the mucus coat is not protecting you or the tight junctions aren't protecting you, these acids are going to get into the soft tissue of your stomach and cause basically what an ulcer is. It's like a blister. Okay, in my opinion, it's like a blister. And if you've ever had a blister on your hand or on the back of your heel, if you had a new pair of shoes or on your feet somewhere, you know that a blister is extremely irritating and it could burn a lot, and it's just not comfortable. Just imagine a blister inside of your stomach or inside of your esophagus, and every time you eat or every time this acid from your stomach hits it, it causes immense pain, right? If you had a blister on your foot, you wouldn't go pouring salt into it, right? Because that would be silly and it would burn a lot. But that's what's happening inside of your stomach when the acids hit this blister inside your stomach. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Okay, gastritis, okay, or inflammation of the stomach can lead to peptic ulcers. Okay, the pepsin that you produce, the hydrochloric acid that is in your stomach, that's going to help digestion. Those are going to erode the stomach wall. Okay, most of these ulcers are caused by some type of bacteria. Okay, the interactions of some type of bacteria, one of which is called Helicobacter pylori. That is a bacteria that lives very, very commonly in human guts. So that is a normal bacteria to have. But sometimes it can cause ulcers if it gets out of hand. These can be treated with different types of antibiotics and antacids like Pepto-Bismol. Okay, you don't want to live on Pepto-Bismol though. Okay, Pepto-Bismol contains like small amounts of like metals and stuff, and you don't want to take that for extended periods of time. You're better off changing your diet and maybe taking antibiotics than taking things like Pepto-Bismol all the time. Okay, here are pictures of a normal esophagus/stomach wall, and here is a picture of an ulcered stomach wall, and you can see this is the blister that you find that I'm talking about, and that's your ulcer. And if things touch that, it hurts a lot, right? If acids touch that, if just food touches that, it's going to hurt a lot and cause you a lot of pain and discomfort. Okay, so now let's move away from the stomach and get into some accessory organs. Okay, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. These are all accessory organs because food does not pass directly through any of these. The small intestines will receive chyme from the stomach, and the secretions of the liver and the pancreas are going to meet in the small intestines as well. Okay, so the liver and the pancreas are going to secrete enzymes and gastric juices into the small intestine so that digestion can occur. Okay, so these secretions enter the tract near the junction of the stomach and the small intestine. So when, I'm going to show you a picture, but when the stomach and the small intestine become kind of one and the same, that's where the liver and the pancreas are going to meet up with it. Okay, so you have, stomach here. Okay, you have intestines here. Your liver and pancreas are kind of going to shoot right in there. As soon as that food enters the digestive system from the stomach, or enters the intestines from the stomach, that's when the liver and the pancreas are going to inject their enzymes and their chemicals. These secretions are really important to the digestive process of the small intestine. So if you don't have these, if your liver or pancreas are not functioning properly, the digestive process in the small intestine is not going to be as good. Okay, the liver itself is a reddish brown gland. Okay, it's a very large gland located immediately inferior to the diaphragm, so directly below the diaphragm. Okay, on the opposite side of the stomach. Okay, so the stomach was on the left side, the liver is on the right side. It's the body's largest gland, weighs about 3 pounds. Okay, and it secretes lots of different things. There are many different functions that the liver has. Okay, the liver has many functions from secreting enzymes for digestion to cleaning your blood of toxins like alcohol, getting rid of red blood cells, producing clotting factors. There's so many things that the liver does. One of which is that we're going to talk about as far as digestion goes is it secretes bile. Whoops, excuse me. Okay, bile is going to be this really important chemical that's made, which is going to help digest fats, okay, and different fat products that you eat. Okay, remember, only 10 to 15% of fat gets digested in the stomach. The rest is going to get digested in the small intestines, and it's going to need the help of this bile, right? If you have 85% of your fats that you eat getting digested by the intestines, it's going to need some help, and that bile is going to help it out. Okay, there are 4 lobes of the liver: the right, left lobe, the quadrate, and the caudate lobes. Okay, there's a ligament that separates the right and left lobes called a falciform ligament. Okay, and we'll see that in a picture soon. And then there are openings between the quadrate and caudate lobes that allow for the hepatic portal vein, which comes into the liver, and also the hepatic artery, which is the artery for the liver and the vein for the liver. Okay, and that opening that those veins and arteries go through is called the hilum. Okay, the hilum is where the hepatic portal vein and the hepatic artery are going to enter from the circulatory system into the liver. Okay. Okay, so here is our liver. We have our right lobe here, much larger than the left lobe. Okay, we have our left lobe here. This ligament down the center is the falciform ligament. That's going to connect the right and the left lobes. Okay, if we turn the liver around and we look at the inferior view of the liver, we see a whole bunch of things here. Okay, we see our caudate lobe here, and we see our quadrate lobe here. We also see the gallbladder. Okay, this green pouch is called the gallbladder. Okay, and that's going to hold bile. We'll get to that in a moment, but that's going to hold bile. Okay, here's the inferior vena cava coming from the heart, so the heart's going to be up here somewhere. Okay, and the inferior vena cava is going to go down behind our liver. And then we have here, okay, that is our hepatic portal vein and our hepatic artery. Okay, the blue one is the vein, the red one is the artery. Okay, and they are going to pass through the hilum, which is the hole that allows them to enter. Okay, and all of these will be connected to the proper outlets for the blood flow. Okay, so what happens? How does the liver work, right? So after a meal, we have things called hepatocytes. Okay, anytime you see the word cyte, it means cell. Okay, hepa, it means liver, or sometimes heme means liver or blood. Okay, but hepata or hepato is going to be liver cells. Okay, so after a meal, your liver cells, your hepatocytes, absorb from the blood these things, okay? It absorbs glucose, amino acids, iron, vitamins, and other nutrients. And what it does is your hepatocytes store them, okay? Or they can metabolize them. They can break them down or build them up, right? We can take, and we learned this from the last lecture, you can take small things and build them into larger things, and that's called synthesis reactions, right? That's called dehydration synthesis. Or you can take the larger thing and you can break it down into its smaller parts, which was called hydrolysis, right? And that's what the liver can do. The liver can, whatever the body needs, it can store it if it needs to be stored, okay? If these vitamins and minerals and amino acids need to be stored, we store them. Glucose, for instance, if you have too much glucose in your bloodstream, your body doesn't want to throw it away. Your body will save it for one day that maybe you don't have enough glucose. So glucose would be like these little boxes here or these little boxes here, okay? And if your liver knows that you're not going to use them right now because you don't need them right now, you have too much, it'll store them and it'll put them together in these large blocks called glycogen, okay? So this glucose can be turned into glycogen, okay, in the liver. Okay, between meals, these hepatocytes will break down stored glycogen. Okay, if you need glycogen, it will break it down, right? So let's say you had too much glycogen, that glucose gets stored. If you have too much glucose in the system, okay, your body will store the glucose as glycogen. And then in between meals, right, you're going to use that glucose that you have in your bloodstream. And then eventually you will have less glucose than what is needed. And then your body goes to your liver and says, do you have any storage? And they go, yeah, of course we do. We got some glycogen here. And it takes that glycogen and then breaks it down into glucose so that it can give it to your cells so ATP can be made. Okay. It's also going to remove and degrade things like hormones. Okay. Hormones are needed at certain times and they're not needed at other times, right? You release them when you need them and you break them down when you don't need them anymore. Okay. You don't constantly produce adrenaline, right? If you did, your heart rate would be through the roof. Okay. But your body produces it. And when it needs it to stop making your heart beat faster, your liver will help get rid of it. Toxins. And toxins are going to be things like alcohol, things like drugs, even prescription drugs are considered to be, toxins, I guess, or things that aren't or have to be processed through the liver. Okay, bile and bile pigments, and drugs. Okay. Okay, they secrete into the blood. Okay, they secrete albumin, which is a protein, other lipoproteins. Clotting factors, I talked about that a moment ago, where the liver is able to help your blood clot, okay, as well as many other things. Okay, so what's it do? It helps absorb food, stores vitamins and minerals. It can break down and give you nutrients when you need them that are stored in the liver. It can remove and degrade toxins and other things that need to be removed from the body. Okay, and it can also make and secrete things into the bloodstream. Okay, lots of functions in the liver. Really, really wonderful. You can't live without a liver. You can live without portions of the liver, but you can't live without the liver. Okay, here we have the gallbladder and pancreas. Okay, this is the duodenum. This is the first part of the small intestines. And here is our gallbladder. Our liver would be in front of this, right? So our liver would be like that. Okay, your stomach would be over here, more of a J shape. Okay, but this would be your stomach, and the pancreas sits behind your stomach. Okay, the pancreas is going to sit behind your stomach. Okay, but this gallbladder would be behind the liver. Okay, and both of these things, the gallbladder and the pancreas, are going to feed. You can see this bile duct. Okay, because the liver makes bile. Right, the liver makes the bile and then stores it in the gallbladder. Okay, so any bile that is made by the liver ends up going inside the gallbladder, and that bile is going to go down the bile duct. It's going to pass through the pancreatic duct, and the pancreatic duct, which is right here, through the center of the pancreas, is going to also meet at that area right there, and the bile will be released. Let me get a different color here. the bile will be released, and the pancreatic juices will also be released into the duodenum of the small intestines. Okay, and over here, this is where the stomach would join the small intestines. So this would be the pyloric sphincter over here, okay, where the stomach joins the small intestines. And as soon as that food enters the small intestines from the stomach, that bile and pancreatic juice are going to hit that chyme that just came from the stomach, so that digestion can occur as it goes through the small intestines. Okay. Okay, so again, the gallbladder is a pear-shaped sac on the underside of the liver. That's what I just showed you. Okay, serves to store and concentrate bile by absorbing water and electrolytes. I just told you that. It's about 10 centimeters long. It's internally lined by folded mucosa, just like kind of the stomach was folded inside. It has a fundus as well, okay, which projects slightly beyond the inferior margin of the liver. Okay, so if you take it, let me go back a couple of pictures. Right here, you can see that part of the gallbladder that kind of peeks out below the liver. That's what they're talking about. That's the head. Okay. Projects slightly beyond the inferior margin. Okay, this is the inferior margin of the liver, right? Inferior means bottom or below. Okay, and here's the head of the gallbladder, which is inferior or projects from the inferior lobe of the liver. Okay, the neck or the cervix leads into the cystic duct. Okay. Here. A bile is a yellow greenish fluid containing a lot of minerals, containing a lot of cholesterol, a lot of fats, phospholipids, and pigments and acids. Okay, you might have heard the term bilirubin. Okay, bilirubin is the principal pigment of bile. Okay, and it gives it that brownish, yellowy, green color. Okay, gallstones. Sometimes you might have heard of kidney stones. Gallstones are very similar, but they happen in the gallbladder instead of the kidneys. Gallstones form if bile becomes excessively concentrated with waste. Okay, a lot of times you can, if you lose a lot of weight too quickly, you can form gallstones. And what a gallstone is, it's basically a little, it's a little nugget of cholesterol, basically a little crystallized nugget of cholesterol and fats, and they get stuck in the gallbladder. And what happens is that the gallbladder kind of gets blocked by the stones. So if we go back to the picture here, if you have a gallstone in here, whoops. If you have a gallstone in here, it could block this opening, okay? And it can, once this fills up with bile, it won't be able to get out because it's being blocked by this stone, which can cause a lot of pain, okay? A lot of pain. And then they'll just go in and take out your gallbladder and remove it. Okay, you can live without a gallbladder. You're not going to digest fats as well if you don't have a gallbladder, so you might have to change your diet. But still, you can live without it. Okay, the liver secretes about 500 to 1,000 milliliters of bile a day. Okay. What a gallstone is, it's a hard mass in either the gallbladder or the bile duct. So you can have that stone in the gallbladder itself, or it can get stuck in the bile duct. Okay, which is also very, very painful. Same thing with kidney stones. It can either be in the kidneys or it could be in the ureters. Okay, either one is not very pleasant. Okay, they are composed of cholesterol and calcium, okay, and bilirubin. Okay, most common in obese women over the age of 40 because they have an excess of cholesterol, and that excess of cholesterol can concentrate in these little stones. But also, like I said, you can get them if you lose weight rapidly. That happened to my sister. My sister lost about 80 pounds in like 3 weeks, okay, because of some crazy diet she did, and she ended up with gallstones. Okay, it's a painful obstruction of the ducts. It could result in something called jaundice. Jaundice is a yellowing of the skin. Okay, and it's poor fat digestion and impaired absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. And sometimes children can be born with jaundice. I was born jaundice. So you kind of come out and you have a yellow tinge to your skin, and they put you in an incubator type of thing. They put you in like a clear box with a special light, and that light will help get rid of the jaundice and will help you digest fats a little bit better as you're developing. Okay, it happens in babies, but it goes away in a couple of days. Okay. In order to get rid of gallstones or even kidney stones, they will use ultrasonic vibrations. Okay. The same type of ultrasound that is used on a pregnant woman, they will use on someone who has gallstones or kidney stones. And the idea behind that is that the sonic vibrations, those sound waves, will actually break up the stones into small pieces. And then those small pieces are then supposed to be, pass through your system. That's the idea, right? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they have to go in and surgically remove things. Okay, so for instance, if you have if you have stones, if you have a stone in here or a stone in here, okay, they'll hit this with sound waves. Okay, and those sound waves are going to reverberate and shake the stone, and hopefully causing the stone to break up into small pieces of stone, so that those small pieces can then travel to where they need to go and they can be, relieved or eliminated from the digestive system in that way. Okay. These are gallstones. They are pretty big gallstones, man. Look how big those are. Okay, I know it's only in millimeters, but you got to think, how wide is a common bile duct? Okay, it's probably not as wide as this as this stone. Okay. Oof, like little pebbles. Okay, the pancreas. The pancreas is a spongy retroperitoneal gland. It's behind the peritoneum. It's posterior to the greater curvature of the stomach, so it's behind the top of the stomach. Measures about 15 centimeters long. That's about 6 inches. Okay, a 12-inch ruler is about 30 centimeters, so 15 centimeters should be about 6 inches. It's 2.5 centimeters thick. It has a head encircled by the duodenum. Okay, so the portion of the small intestine is going to encircle the head of the pancreas. It has a body, which is the mid portion, and a tail as well, and you'll see that in a moment. It acts as both an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland. Okay, so as an endocrine gland, it produces insulin. Okay, that's its endocrine gland function. It produces insulin and glucagon, and what that does is that it's going to take sugar, okay, glucose, from the blood and give it to your muscles. Okay, so that your muscles can make ATP. Okay. As an exocrine gland, okay, it's going to secrete pancreatic juice. So what does that mean? So this means it's going to help digestion, right? It's going to secrete pancreatic juice to help digest fats, to help digest proteins, so that you can get the most nutrients out of your food. Some other pancreatic enzymes, amylase, right? We've seen amylase in the mouth as well, and that's salivary amylase, and this is called pancreatic amylase, and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to digest starches, carbs, sugars, things like that. Okay, it's also going to produce lipase, pancreatic lipase, which is going to digest fats. And it's going to produce ribonuclease and deoxyribonuclease, which is going to digest RNA and DNA, right? And you might be saying, what? Why is it digesting RNA and DNA? Well, DNA is in all cells of all living things, right? So if you eat a plant, that plant has DNA. If you eat a cow, that cow has DNA. You eat a pig, that pig has DNA. And what you do, just like you do with any other nutrient, is you break it down so that you can use it again later, right? If you have a protein, you break it down into amino acids so that you can use those amino acids for things like, rebuilding muscles, right? When you exercise and you want to get big, strong muscles, you use the amino acids for that. When you have DNA, when you eat DNA, you break it down into its components, which are called A's, T's, G's, and C's. And you use those to go through mitosis. When you make new cells, you need to make new DNA, and it comes from the DNA that you eat. Okay, we reuse and recycle all the stuff that we eat. Okay, the small intestine. Okay, nearly all chemical digestion and nutrient absorption occurs in the small intestines. Okay, so most of the mechanical stuff happened already. It happened in the mouth, it happened in the stomach. Okay, the chemical stuff, the majority of it is going to happen in the small intestines. And this is the real important part, the nutrient absorption. Okay, your stomach is not made to absorb nutrients. Your esophagus is not made to absorb nutrients. Your intestines do the absorption. Okay, this is the longest part of the tract, right? It's about 5 meters long. That's about 15 feet. Okay, 15 feet of just small intestines in a living person. You can have up to 8 meters long in a cadaver. Okay, so a dead person, their intestines are longer. It's not that they have more intestines. It's just because their intestines have, like, they don't have muscle tone, so they're kind of like fully relaxed. And when something's fully relaxed, it tends to, you know, stretch out. The word small in small intestine does not refer to the length. It refers to the diameter. Okay, so small intestine is smaller in diameter to large intestine. Okay, so the opening of small intestine is smaller than the opening in large intestine. Okay, you have way more small intestine than you do large intestine. So you're not talking about how long it is, because you have lots more. If this was the small intestine, this would be the large intestine. Again, we're talking about the openings. Okay, so it's all about the openings. And the diameter of a small intestine is about 1 inch. Okay, not very big. Okay, the highlighted parts are the small intestines. And here's the stomach. Let me get my thing here. Okay, here's the pyloric sphincter, where the stomach meets the duodenum. The duodenum is your first portion of small intestine. It's not very long. It's only about that long. That's how long the duodenum is. Let me get a different color for the next section. Okay, the next section is called the jejunum. And then the jejunum is pretty long, okay? And then eventually the jejunum is going to meet up with the ileum as the last part of the large intestine. And that's going to be, let me grab a different color, okay? And that's going to be this area, okay? And in this area, this is going to be total from, you know, from the beginning here all the way to the end, where it connects to the large intestine around here somewhere. Okay, there's going to be, see this, there's this little area here called the Ileocecal Valve, which we'll get to in a moment. That's where the ileum meets the cecum, or the large intestine. Okay, but from here to here, that's 15 feet of intestines. Okay, and all your nutrient absorption is going to happen in those small intestines. Okay, the small intestine is coiled tube filling most of the abdominal cavity. We said that. It's divided into 3 sections. We kind of said that already too, but we'll go through real quick. Okay, we have the duodenum. Whoops, do that all the time. We have the duodenum, which is the first 10 inches. Okay, it begins at that pyloric valve and receives major and minor pancreatic ducts respectively, right? So if we go back, okay, here's the pyloric valve. That's where it begins. And remember, the liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder are going to enter right there, okay? Okay, the next section is the duodenum. Okay, that's going to receive, the duodenum receives the stomach content, pancreatic juice, bile. We talked about that. Stomach acid is neutralized here, okay, so that it doesn't give ulcers in the duodenum. Fats are physically broken up, and the term we use for breaking up fat is called emulsify or emulsification. And the thing that actually does that is the bile. Okay, so there's your big reveal for what the bile does. Okay, the bile is going to emulsify fat, and emulsify does not mean to break down. It means to the term break down is different. Breakdown means chemically. So like when you take a protein and you chemically break it down, you get amino acids as a product. When you have a large glob of fat, what bile does is it basically just turns it into small globs of fat. It's not chemically breaking them down. It's just physically making the parts smaller. Okay. The pancreatic enzymes, that's what actually does the chemical breakdown. So the pancreatic enzymes take these little globules of fat and break them into fatty acids and glycerol molecules. Okay. The next section is called the jejunum. It's about almost 2 meters, about 3 feet in a living person. Okay, a lot of your nutrient absorption is going to happen in the jejunum. Small intestine tissues are designed for nutrient digestion and absorption. There's lots of large surface areas due to these internal folds or projections in the intestines. So if you take a look at like microscopic slides of intestinal tissue, you'll see that there are these little fingers that protrude from the surface of the intestines, and those fingers are called villi and microvilli. And they just kind of look like little fingers that line the intestines. Okay, and the more little fingers you have, the more surface that's available for the food and the chyme to touch, right? If you didn't have these fingers, okay, think about all the surfaces of each one of these little fingers. You have billions of these. And if you took them all away, you would take away all their surfaces and you would take away a lot of absorption. But the more of these you have, the better the absorption gets. Okay, so they increase surface area by a factor of 10. That's a lot. And microvilli increase surface area by a factor of 20, because the smaller these little fingers are, the more you can fit, right? And every time you have one of these little microvilli or villi, it increases the surface area so that you can absorb more and more and more. And that's a good thing. And this is what they look like if you had a real artist make a picture, okay, instead of just me. Okay, so each one of these is a villi. Okay, and these villi, you can see all the surface here. Okay, all of this surface is going to touch food and chyme and absorb those nutrients. Okay. Okay, the large intestine. The large intestine receives about 500 milliliters of indigestible residue per day. Okay, so 500 mils of indigestible residue. Okay, it reduces that 500. Okay, so this is where we see the compaction, right? We see compaction here, right? Compaction. And compaction means it's going to take something larger and make it into something smaller. Okay, so it's going to take 500 milliliters of indigestible residue, and it's going to reduce it to 150 milliliters of feces. And where does the other 350 mils go? Usually it's water that's being reabsorbed into the back into the body. Okay, so what you have, and I talked about it in the other lecture a little bit, is you have this kind of sludge, right? It's this liquid. It's mostly liquid, and then it has like kind of chunks of solid waste in it. And if you take the water away and then you press all the chunks together, okay, you get one larger piece of feces. Okay, it's kind of like how they make cheese. If you've ever looked at how they make cheese, basically they get a tub and they fill the tub with milk. And then they add bacteria to the milk, and the bacteria make the milk chunky, right? It makes it curdle, right? So you get all these chunks of curd. It's actually called curd, right? Okay. So now you have a tub full of curd and whey, right? Little Miss Muffet's out on a tub eating her curds and whey. The curd is the chunks, the liquid is the whey, and the whey is mostly water. So in this tub, they have a drain, and they open the drain, and all the whey comes out. And what you're left with is a tub full of curds. So what they do is then they use hydraulics and they press all the curds together to form, like blocks of cheese or wheels of cheese. Okay, and then they send that off. So that's kind of like what your large intestine does, right? It has this sludge, this curds and whey would be the equivalent of like the water and the solid wastes floating around in your large intestines. And then when you drain the water away, you're left with just the solid parts, and then your large intestine compresses them into feces, which you then can eliminate or remove from the body. Okay, your large intestine is about 5 feet long. Okay, 2.5 inches in diameter, so it's double, if not more than double, than the small intestines. Your appendix is attached to your large intestines. Okay, we don't use that appendix any longer. It is an organ that we probably used back in the day when we were, when we were still evolving. Okay, but we don't currently have a functioning appendix. It can get infected if anything gets into it, but that is fairly rare, knock on wood. Okay, you have a couple of portions of your large intestine. You have the ascending colon, you have the transverse colon, and the descending colon. Okay. After those three large portions, you have something called the sigmoid colon, which is an S-shaped portion, which leads down into the pelvis and eventually to your rectum. Okay, the rectum portion, which is the ending of at the anal canal. Okay, there are valves there and folds. The anal canal is 3 centimeters, is the last 3 centimeters of your large intestine. So your rectum is still part of your large intestine. Okay, the rectum passes through this levator ani muscle and terminates at the anus. The sinuses of the anal columns are going to make mucus, and that mucus is there to lubricate the anal canal during defecation. You want mucus there so that the feces can easily be eliminated. You don't want to have to struggle with that, and sometimes if you aren't making enough mucus, that could cause a struggle when going to the bathroom. There are veins called hemorrhoidal veins. These are normal veins that are inside of the anal passageway or the anal column. You get hemorrhoids, okay, when these veins distend or protrude past the anal canal and bulge outside of the anus. Okay, that could happen if you sit down for too long, like not just in like one day. If you have one day where you're sitting a lot, that's not going to be a big deal. But if you are someone who, like for a living, you sit at a seat or a desk most of the day and you're not moving around, that could lead to hemorrhoids. If you struggle going to the bathroom on a constant basis, if you have like one day out of the month where you had a struggle going to the bathroom, pushing out feces, that's not a big deal. But if that happens like on a daily basis or a weekly basis, that could that's a big leading cause of hemorrhoids. Being obese could lead to hemorrhoids, and pregnancy actually almost always results in hemorrhoids because of the amount of force that a female needs to use to help get the baby out of the birth canal. Okay, so here is the large intestines. Okay, this is where it begins. This is where the ileum of the small intestine, let me get a marker here and get a different color. Okay, this is where the ileum of the small intestine would meet the large intestine, and we call that the ileocecal valve. Ileum, cecal, cecum, valve. Okay, so at the ileocecal valve, that's where the ileum connects to our cecum, which is the beginning of our large intestines. Here's the appendix. Here you can see the appendix, this little finger-like projection there. Okay, and then we have our ascending colon because it's going up. We have our transverse colon. We have our descending colon, which goes down. We have our sigmoid colon. It's kind of this S shape. Okay, it's our sigmoid colon. Okay, and then we have our rectum. And then the last bit is the anal canal and the anal sphincter. Okay, again, it's a circular muscle, and every sphincter is a circular muscle that's going to open and close to allow things to flow through. So your heart, your stomach has them, your esophagus has them, your intestines have them. Okay. Here's a closer look at the rectum and the anus. Okay, we can see the hemorrhoidal veins here, and when these hemorrhoidal veins get distended, they can extend outside of the anus. And that's when it's painful, and that's when it's difficult to deal with, because these veins are outside, and you're literally sitting on them, and you're wiping them, you're touching them. Okay, it's not a very pleasant thing to have a hemorrhoid. Okay, so try to have as much fiber as you can, so that because fiber will help you pass feces without any struggles. Okay, so therefore not giving you hemorrhoids. Okay. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about is this slide, and your gut has a microbiome, which means it has lots of living things in it. There are about 800 species of bacteria that are found in your large intestines. Those bacteria are good. Okay, you want to have bacteria in your intestines because they're going to help with digestion. They're going to digest cellulose. They're going to digest pectin and other carbohydrates. They're going to help synthesize vitamin B and vitamin K for us. Okay, so that's a good thing. So it's a symbiotic relationship. So they live inside of us and help us, and we help them by giving them food, right? A flatus it's a fart. It's intestinal gas. Okay, the average person produces about 500 milliliters of gas a day. Okay, most gas is formed in the large intestines and is reabsorbed instead of released as a flatulence. Okay, much of flatulence is swallowed air. Okay, most of the gas you have is air that gets into your digestive system. But, however, bacteria do add to the amount of air in our system because when they eat and they respire, they release carbon dioxide as a byproduct sometimes. Okay, hydrogen sulfide is going to produce the odor. Okay, our body is going to produce hydrogen sulfide and indole and scatol, and those elements are going to produce the odor of the flatus. Okay, hydrogen gas may explode during electrical cauterization used in surgery. That is very uncommon. Okay, but that's what they talk about why cow farts are ruining the atmosphere or something like that, because there's hydrogen gas and methane gas that's in your flatulates. Okay, but I can't find a better way to end a lecture than talking about farts. So that is going to do it for the second part of the digestive lecture. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll see you next time.